First contact Dr. Sarah Chen wiped the condensation from her forehead as she adjusted the environmental controls in her new quarters. 18 hours on Azuris, and I'm still not acclimated to this humidity, she muttered to herself. The research outpost, nestled in a valley of towering iridescent trees, had been established to study the planet's unique crystalline formations and to build diplomatic relations with the Azuri, the dominant sentient species, when Director Cooper informed her that an Azuri diplomat would be joining her xenobiology team. Sarah had almost requested reassignment. The Azuri were known for their complex social hierarchies and intricate customs. One misinterpreted gesture could unravel months of careful diplomacy. Dr. Chen, your liaison has arrived, announced Aria, the station's AI, her voice emanating from hidden speakers. Sarah straightened her science uniform and practiced the formal greeting she'd studied for weeks. Left hand placed over the center of the chest, fingers pressed together with a slight bow of the head. The laboratory door slid open with a quiet hum, revealing her new research partner. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his purple skin shimmering under the laboratory lights. Sleek dark hair was pulled back in an intricate braid contrasting with his ceremonial attire. His posture was impeccable, every movement deliberate and precise. I am Kai, he announced, his voice deep with a melodic quality that seemed surprising coming from such an imposing figure. Guardian of the Western Archipelago, son of the third lineage. Sarah performed the greeting gesture carefully. Dr. Sarah Chen, lead xenobiologist, Earth Science Division. Kai's piercing amber eyes narrowed slightly, and she immediately feared she'd made a cultural misstep, but he merely inclined his head and moved past her to examine the laboratory equipment. Your technology is adequate, he observed, running a long purple hand over a genetic sequencer. It will serve our purposes. For the next 5 days they worked in tense silence, cataloging biological samples from the coastal regions. Sarah found herself constantly on edge, hyper-aware of every word and gesture. Kai was efficient but distant, answering her questions with minimal responses. On the 6th day, as they were analyzing the cellular structure of an aquatic plant species, Sarah noticed something unusual. When Kai reached across the workstation to adjust a microscope, a faint indigo glow pulsed from beneath his fitted inner garment. At first she thought it was a reflection from their equipment, but the light seemed to throb with a rhythm similar to a heartbeat. Her scientific curiosity overwhelmed her diplomatic caution. She found herself staring, trying to discern if it was technological, biological, or perhaps part of his ceremonial attire. Why do you keep staring at my chest, human? Kai's voice cut through the lab like ice. Sarah jerked upright, horror washing over her as she realized how inappropriate her gaze must have seemed. The diplomatic incident she'd feared was unfolding before her. I wasn't, she stammered, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. There's a glow beneath your garment. I noticed it pulsing. I was trying to determine if it was a technology I'm unfamiliar with or perhaps some kind of injury. She braced herself for the cold anger she'd been warned about during cultural briefings. Instead, something unexpected happened. Kai's expression shifted, his amber eyes studying her with newfound interest and injury. He repeated, his voice softer than she'd heard before. You were concerned? Yes, she admitted, relieved he wasn't offended. Is everything all right? Kai tilted his head, his gaze penetrating. How curious you are, Dr. Chen. Most would not notice, and those who did would certainly not dare to mention it. He took a step closer, towering over her. Perhaps there is more to you than I initially assumed. Hidden luminescence. The following morning, Sarah arrived at the laboratory earlier than usual, still unsettled by the previous day's interaction. She'd spent half the night researching Azuri cultural taboos, finding nothing about glowing chest phenomena, or whether expressing concern was appropriate. When Kai entered, his usual commanding presence seemed slightly less intimidating. He acknowledged her with a subtle nod, a casual greeting that hadn't been part of their routine before. I have considered your observation, he said without preamble, setting down his data tablet. It is uncommon for outsiders to notice such things. Sarah carefully measured her response. I didn't mean to intrude on something private. Yet you did, Kai replied. But there was no accusation in his tone. Among my people, warriors and diplomats do not acknowledge physical vulnerabilities in public. To do so would suggest weakness. He approached the central workbench, maintaining a respectful distance. What you saw is what we call a Ziatha memory mark. When an Azuri experiences profound trauma, our bodies retain a physical manifestation. The more significant the event, the longer the manifestation persists. A biological marker of trauma. Sarah murmured, her scientific mind immediately fascinated. Fascinating, our bodies form scar tissue, but it doesn't glow. The luminescence is our life energy, healing the affected pathways. Kai explained, mine has persisted longer than most. His fingers drifted unconsciously to where she'd seen the light beneath his garment. The gesture seemed strangely vulnerable coming from someone so composed. May I ask what happened? She ventured, then immediately backtracked. I'm sorry, that's probably too personal. To her surprise, Kai didn't withdraw. Instead, he seemed to be weighing something in his mind, coming to a decision. 2 planetary cycles ago, I led a diplomatic mission to the Northern Territories. His voice remained steady, but his eyes grew distant. Our transport was attacked by separatists who oppose relations with off-worlders. Their energy weapons they cut differently than conventional weapons. Sarah winced sympathetically. Yet you survived. I did more than survive human, Kai said with quiet intensity. I ensured every member of my delegation returned home. I fulfilled my duty despite my injury. There was no boast in his words, just a simple statement of fact. They worked in silence for several hours after that, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer tense but companionable, broken occasionally by discussions about their research. That evening, as Azuris's 3 moons rose outside the laboratory windows, casting prismatic light across the workstations, Kai paused in his analysis of a particularly complex genetic sequence. Would you like to see it? He asked abruptly. Sarah looked up from her data, confused. See what? The Ziatha, he replied, his fingers already moving to the fasteners of his fitted garment. If you are genuinely curious from a scientific perspective. Before she could formulate a response, he unfastened the upper section of his garment, revealing smooth purple skin beneath. There, spanning from his collarbone to the center of his chest, was an intricate pattern of glowing indigo light that pulsed gently beneath his skin. The pattern resembled something between a flowering vine and celestial constellation branches of luminescence, spreading outward from a central point. It's beautiful, Sarah said honestly, captivated by the ethereal glow. Kai's expression flickered with surprise. Beautiful. My people would call it evidence of failure, proof that I was not diplomatic enough, skilled enough to prevent conflict. On Earth, some cultures see scars as marks of courage, Sarah offered. Proof that you faced something that should have destroyed you, but you were stronger. She hesitated, then added softly, and yes, I think it's beautiful, like living art. Something shifted in Kai's amber eyes, a softening, a reassessment. He replaced his garment slowly, his movements deliberate. You are unlike the other humans I have encountered, Dr. Chen, he said finally. You perceive differently. That evening, for the first time since his arrival, they shared a meal together in the station's common area. The other researchers watched in amazement as the usually reserved Azuri diplomat engaged in conversation with Sarah about his world's customs and beliefs. As they parted ways for the night, Kai placed his hand over his chest in the formal gesture, but this time there was warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Storm of revelations. The storms came to Azuris with unexpected ferocity, trapping the research team indoors for days on end. Water cascaded against the station's reinforced windows, turning the world outside into a blur of violet and teal. The enforced proximity broke down formalities among the team members, all except Kai, who maintained his composed demeanor despite the circumstances. Yet Sarah noticed subtle changes. He had begun calling her by her first name rather than her title. He would position himself near her during team briefings. Once when she was struggling with a particularly heavy equipment case, he simply lifted it with one hand, his arm brushing against hers as he set it down. 2 weeks after the incident in the lab, they were assigned to an overnight expedition to monitor biological responses during the planet's rare electromagnetic storms. The small research shelter nestled in a clearing 3 miles from the main outpost was barely large enough for 2 people. The storm will peak in approximately 3 hours, Sarah said, checking the monitoring equipment. Rain hammered against the shelter's roof, nearly drowning out her words. Kai nodded, removing his outer ceremonial attire to reveal the lighter, form-fitting bodysuit. Beneath, without the formal layers, his figure was lean and powerful, his movements more fluid. "These storms remind me of the renewal season on my homeworld," he said, settling cross-legged on the floor near the environmental regulator. "When I was young, my caretaker, what you might call a father, would recite ancient poems while the storms raged." Sarah smiled, adjusting the scanner frequencies. "My mother did something similar. She would build tents from blankets and we'd hide inside with small lights while she told stories." "A tent for protection?" Kai asked clearly, trying to understand the concept. "No, just for comfort," she explained, looking up from her work, meeting his curious gaze. "Children on Earth do it for the feeling of coziness and safety, a special place that feels separate from the ordinary world." Kai considered this. "On my world, children study diplomacy and self-defense from the time they can speak. There is little time for such comforts." "That sounds demanding." Sarah said carefully, "It is our way," he replied, but his tone held a note of something she hadn't heard before. Perhaps reflection or question. A sudden surge in the electromagnetic readings drew their attention back to the equipment. For the next hour they worked in focused tandem, recording data as the storm intensified outside. When the primary scanner malfunctioned, Sarah knelt to repair it. As she leaned forward, she lost her balance on the damp floor, stumbling sideways. Kai moved with astonishing speed, catching her before she could fall. His strong arm steadied her, and she found herself pressed momentarily against him, her hand inadvertently coming to rest directly over the area where his Zayatha glowed beneath his bodysuit. She jerked back. Immediately, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's all right," he interrupted, his voice unusually gentle. The indigo glow beneath his bodysuit had intensified at her touch, pulsing more rapidly. "It doesn't cause discomfort." They remained frozen for a moment, faces inches apart. Sarah became acutely aware of his alien features, the subtle ridge along his jawline, the deeper purple markings around his eyes, the slightly different curve of his lips. "What does it feel like?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "When someone touches it." Kai took her hand and slowly, deliberately placed it back over his chest. Beneath her palm, she could feel the warmth of the glow, a gentle vibration that seemed to resonate with his heartbeat. "It feels like recognition," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "like acknowledgement of something I have tried to conceal." Outside, lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the shelter in brilliant flashes. The monitoring equipment beeped, insistently forgotten. "Sarah," he said, using her name with a new inflection, "on my world, diplomats do not show vulnerability. We do not speak of our wounds or our doubts. We do not form personal connections." "And here?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. "What about here on this world?" In answer, Kai leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers in a gesture she recognized from her cultural studies as one of deep intimacy among his people. "Here," he whispered, "I am beginning to see the value in your human ways." The kiss that followed was tentative at first, a careful exploration of differences and similarities. His lips were warmer than a human's, the taste subtly sweet and unfamiliar. When they finally pulled apart, the Zayatha beneath his bodysuit was glowing so brightly it illuminated the space between them. The readings. Sarah murmured, still dazed by what had just happened. Kai smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that transformed his face. "Yes, the storm we should. but neither of them moved immediately, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them as powerful and inevitable as the storm raging outside. Diplomatic complications. The main research station buzzed with activity as the team prepared for the arrival of the diplomatic envoy from Earth. The successful biological research had accelerated treaty negotiations, and high-ranking officials from both species would be arriving to formalize the alliance for Sarah and Kai. The 3 weeks since the night in the storm shelter had been a delicate balance of professional collaboration and stolen moments of privacy. They had established a rhythm, working efficiently together during the day, exploring their growing connection in the quiet hours when the rest of the team had retired. "The Grand Counselor herself is coming," Kai said one evening, as they lay together in Sarah's quarters. The dim lighting highlighted the glow of his Ziatha, which had become a familiar comfort to her. "She rarely leaves our capital world." Sarah traced the luminescent pattern with her fingertips, marveling at how responsive it was to her touch. "Is that good? Or bad for us both?" He admitted, his amber eyes troubled. "Her presence elevates the importance of the treaty, but she adheres strictly to traditional protocols, which don't include interspecies relationships," Sarah concluded. "Our people have never—" He began, then stopped. "This is unprecedented, Sarah." Before she could respond, the station's AI interrupted. "Incoming transmission from Earth Diplomatic Corps for Dr. Chen." The message was clear and devastating. Sarah was being reassigned effective, immediately. Her expertise was needed back on Earth for the final treaty preparations. Director Cooper's face on the screen left no room for argument. "This makes things simpler, doesn't it?" she said, after the transmission ended, her voice hollow. "We knew this couldn't last." Kai's expression remained carefully neutral, but his Ziatha pulsed erratically beneath his bodysuit. "Is that what you believe?" The diplomatic ships arrived 3 days later. Sarah stood in the formal reception line, her posture rigid, her expression professional, as Earth's ambassador Isabel stepped forward, followed by Azuri's Grand Counselor, Rena. What happened next would be recorded in both worlds' historical archives, though no one would ever know the true reason behind it. As the formal introductions began, Kai stepped forward and spoke in the ancient ceremonial language of his people. The Grand Counselor's eyes widened in shock. Ambassador Isabel looked to her translators in confusion. "What did he say?" Sarah whispered. "To Area. He has invoked the right of connection." The AI replied, "A rarely used diplomatic custom." Later that night, as the station hummed with diplomatic activity, Kai found Sarah in the observation dome. "I have claimed you as my diplomatic counterpart. Inseparable in negotiations," he explained. "It is an ancient provision, one not invoked in generations." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You risked everything." "I made a choice," he said simply, his Ziatha glowing visibly, even through his formal attire. "One I will not regret." Bridging worlds. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the ceremonial platform in the Grand Pavilion of Azuris's capital city. The treaty signing was minutes away, culminating months of intense negotiation. She adjusted the formal, diplomatic uniform that now bore both Earth's insignia and the symbol of Azuri cooperation. "Nervous?" asked Ambassador Isabel, joining her at the railing. "A little," Sarah admitted. "I never expected to be at the center of interplanetary history." When the Grand Counselor appointed Kai as permanent diplomatic liaison to Earth and requested you as his human counterpart, I knew something extraordinary had happened. Isabel smiled knowingly, though I suspect it wasn't just his negotiation skills that impressed you. Sarah felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "We've both made sacrifices and created something new." Isabel nodded toward the approaching Azuri delegation, where Kai walked alongside Grand Counselor Rena, his ceremonial robes bearing a new insignia, one that matched the symbol on Sarah's uniform. The signing ceremony proceeded with the formal precision characteristic of both cultures. As Sarah and Kai stepped forward to witness the historic document, their hands briefly touched, a gesture not lost on either delegation later, as celebration lights illuminated the capital city. Sarah and Kai stood in a private garden overlooking the bioluminescent valley below. The council has accepted our proposal. Kai said, his voice reflecting both wonder and pride. We will be the first joint ambassadorial team representing both worlds. Half the year on Earth, half on Azurus. Sarah smiled. A bridge between worlds. More than a bridge, Kai said softly. His hand found hers, their fingers, intertwining, a beginning. He opened his ceremonial robe, revealing his Zayatha now transformed. Its pattern had evolved, the once jagged lines now forming an intricate design that incorporated symbols from both their worlds. The indigo glow pulsed, steadily strong and sure. The healers say they've never seen this before, he explained, the pattern changing, evolving. They believe it's because of you, because of us. Sarah placed her palm against the luminescent mark, feeling its warmth. From wound to wonder. From isolation to connection, Kai added. He pressed his forehead to hers in the Azuri gesture of intimacy. This is just the beginning, Sarah. For us, for both our peoples. As the celebration continued below them, they remained in their private sanctuary too. Beings from different worlds who had discovered that some connections transcend the boundaries of species and stars. Some bonds, like the living light between them, grow stronger with each passing day, illuminating not just their path, but the way forward for all who would follow.